Hey, how are you doing, everyone, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and in the last episode, we talked about 5 players that I am really liking in my Dynasty Startup drafts right now, players that I am targeting at a high level. It would make high priorities to go after them. In this episode, we'll be talking about the exact opposite. I'm going to be going through 5 players who I am not looking to draft and who I am being very weary and very cautious of selecting at whatever stages of the board they're going at, and we'll talk ADPs and draft values throughout the course of today's video, in addition to the red flags that I see with these players. So if you're new around here, make sure to drop down and click that subscribe button to join the SFS community and give today's video a like so others out there can find my content. And let's not waste any time. Let's get into things. As always, if you have any questions, you can drop those down in the comment section below or reach out to me on the SFS community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. I wanted to kick off today's video by talking about Aaron Jones, one of the running backs for the Green Bay Packers. This is going to be a team that sees a lot of changes this offseason, and the entire landscape and center of this football team is potentially pivoting on the decision of Aaron Rodgers, and it will depend on the decision of Aaron Rodgers, whether that is to stay or to go in Green Bay. There's a lot of cap issues with this team right now, and they're going to have to make a lot of tough choices. But of all the things that are going to change in this organization this year, the one thing I do not see changing is obviously the presence of A.J. Dillon and what that means for Aaron Jones' workload and what that means for his fantasy value. This past season, we really got an even more extreme case of, if you look back to in the 2019 and 2020 seasons when Aaron Jones finished as the RB2 back in 19 and the RB6 in 2020 in half PPR leagues, he still wasn't really a workhorse. Despite putting up these elite numbers, his touchdown count was very high. He was a fairly dynamic player, having very efficient numbers in the rushing and receiving departments. But since the emergence of A.J. Dillon, we saw Jamal Williams leave in free agency this past offseason, Dillon has stepped into that number 2 role and claimed a very healthy amount of work in this offense, which going forward I see as the very clear-cut strategy for this team. It's just in the better interest of them to keep 2 running backs fresh and healthy and develop a 1-2 punch with these 2 players, as opposed to laying all of the burden on one guy, having him wear down throughout the course of the season, and then your eventual hopeful playoff run kind of fizzles out when your star running back, per se, is beat up through 17 games now of NFL season tackling and playing football. So Aaron Jones, we know about the presence of A.J. Dillon. As I said, the already non-workhorse, a player who wasn't getting a ridiculous volume to begin with, saw his touches per game in the rushing department, so his rushing attempts per game, drop from the mid-14s in 2020 and 2019 down to 11 touches per game in the rushing category for the 2021 season, and I expect that to stay much of the same. Now, the receiving involvement has been fairly consistent, but we're also in a second straight year of seeing his touchdown production decline. Since he had 20 plus in 2019, we saw that number dip down to 11 total touchdowns in 2020, and he had just 10 this season, 4 of which came in one contest back in week 2 against Detroit. So you have a very concentrated, almost half of his touchdown production came from one contest this year, and down the stretch, Aaron Jones was a very lackluster fantasy play. And again, this isn't something I see changing going forward. Right now in Dynasty Startups, he's going in about the 3rd round, and that's a territory I would absolutely not take a player who he is going to be turning 28 in December, so later on in the season. That doesn't really concern me all that much. I think that he still has a couple years left in him of being a very, very talented player playing at the peak of his NFL game. However, this isn't a player being unleashed in that fashion, and that's something that we have to consider. And for that reason, I see Aaron Jones as a perennial RB2 going forward, unless something were to happen to A.J. Dillon. And that obviously could happen, but even if A.J. Dillon were to have some catastrophic injury, whether it be an ACL tear or an Achilles rupture, that's going to keep him out for one NFL season. So you don't want to be limiting your upside with one of your top 3 picks. That's just not a good idea, a good investment. At similar ADP or later on in the draft in Dynasty Startups based off of Sleeper Fantasy PPR Dynasty ADP, you can get guys like David Montgomery, who I think has a larger work share in that offense in Chicago, although the overall production might be a bit lower for that team. The efficiency is certainly lower than that of Green Bay under Aaron Rodgers. You can get a really high upside player in just his second NFL season in Travis Etienne at a later ADP. Josh Jacobs, who post Kenyon Drake's injury, we saw him used in the workhorse fashion, or even a guy a couple rounds later with some nice upside, and a Michael Carter who also has youth on his side as well. So you're getting a running back with, again, limited upside here in Aaron Jones in his second contract at the running back position, which we know has a lower shelf life. This is a position and a player I'd be looking to stay away from at this point in the draft. Next up here, I want to talk about DeAndre Hopkins, a player we've talked about as one of the top 2 or 3, some would even say the top wide receiver of the last decade based on his collective body of work, the productivity he's had, and obviously factoring, this kind of goes out of the fantasy realm of things, but talking about the production he's had and maintained with lower levels of quarterback play. And it hasn't been until the later stages of his 20s, and now entering into his age 30 season. He'll turn 30 in June this year, where he's finally started to have Deshaun Watson in his last years in Houston, and now Kyler Murray as an Arizona Cardinal. But the main concern with me is shelf life here. We're seeing the injury regularity with DeAndre Hopkins become more and more prevalent, and he's had nagging issues that cost him to miss a lot of time this year and has cost him games earlier on in his career. And after you turn that corner of the age 30 season, even though DeAndre Hopkins is not an overly physical player at the wide receiver position, I believe the frequency, it's just wear and tear on the body of those injuries, is going to become a greater occurrence and something that happens again with more regularity. I went and a great resource to check out injury information. I will be putting this stuff into my Dynasty draft guide profiles for each player. I'll be doing either my top 250 or top 300 Dynasty players. I'll be making profiles for each and every one of them. You can unlock access to both of my draft guides for the 2022 season. Wow, 2020 was 2 years ago already. You can unlock all that information on sizzlefantasy.com by becoming an SFS Gold member for just $5 a month, essentially, and you'll unlock an all-access pass. Keep that guide for as long as you want it, and once you no longer need it, maybe your draft has already passed, you can easily cancel your subscription in your membership profile. But I'll be having access to all of this information and more, diving into situational analysis on those Dynasty draft profiles with rankings and all that good stuff. And then another cool feature of that is if you become a Gold member, you get exclusive rights and privileges on the community Discord server, where you're going to be able to get in contact with me and have access to my DMs to ask me any questions you have. But getting kind of outside the box here, a great resource in the time being to find injury information is on playerprofiler.com. They have a full body diagram and color code the area of the body that a player has a particular injury at, and it basically factors in regularity and frequency of injuries, significance of the injuries that they're experiencing and whatnot. And the hamstring has been a huge issue for DeAndre Hopkins. He has had 5 separate NFL seasons of his so far where a hamstring strain has impacted his year, and this year that cost him some time. And again, that age 30 corner is here, and we are now getting into a player who is being drafted in the 4th round of Dynasty Startups, that the wide receiver position is loaded with talent and upside, and other names you could potentially be drafting anywhere from a Chris Godwin, a T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, players going in similar ADP to him. Deontay Johnson is going just before him. If he slips down a little bit, I would much rather have Deontay Johnson's youth on my side, or heck, even a Calvin Ridley. And a lot of questions right now with Calvin Ridley as well, as it pertains to his commitment to football and when he'll be back. Obviously, he stepped away from the game this past season to deal with some personal stuff, so hopefully he is doing well with that and can return to the field next year if that's what's right for him. But DeAndre Hopkins, a ton of guys I would rather have. And that hamstring issue doesn't even factor in the knee concern that actually knocked him out entirely for this season, and he never saw the field after he sustained that injury. So D-Hop's injuries are racking up. There's a ton of other options that are very talented. And it's quite possible those players never reach the heights of being a top 1, 2, or even 3 player at the position in the game. But those guys can give you a heck of a lot of fantasy productivity for an extended period of shelf life. And that's ultimately something that's incredibly important when talking about our dynasty leagues. My third player here is Travis Kelce. And I absolutely love Travis Kelce. I would say for the next 1 to 2 seasons, he still remains at the top of the position as a player we consider to be a top 1, 2. I mean, honestly, I say his floor for this year might be tight end 3 if he's available for the majority of the contests this year and plays 15 or 16 of the 17 available games for him. He's just that type of a player, but he is definitely closer to the end of his NFL career than he is to the start. And when you have to invest a draft pick, which currently, again, back to that sleeper ADP for Dynasty PPR formats, is 24th overall, and that's the last pick in the second round of your startup draft. You're almost forcing your hand here, and this is something we're really going to talk about at an even more extreme extent with my next player on the list today, is when you draft a player this high with this little youth left in front of him and a very condensed shelf life, you're forcing your hand to have to compete and have to contend immediately out of the gates in your league. And that's something you don't necessarily want to do because we're building a dynasty here. We're not trying to build a 1-year, push all your chips to the table, championship run, and then have a complete wasteland of veteran talent that can't net you anything on the trading block in future seasons. So I would hate to see someone draft Travis Kelce in that second or early third round ADP in a 12-team league and then have him stuck on their team for the later stages of his career when his physical prime might begin to deteriorate. And now Travis Kelce could prove me wrong. He could come out here and play, what was it, Antonio Gates that played dang near into his age 40 season. I believe he actually hung it up at age 39. But I mean, he looked like an old man out there and was limping around the football field. Maybe Travis Kelce can prove me wrong and come out here and play like a beast for 4 more seasons till he's 37 or 38 years of age. He's going to be entering into his age 33 season here on October 5th. He turns 33 years of age. But that's not the expectation. I would much rather invest my draft capital, and that's the big thing here. The capital is too high for this level of investment. I would much rather see you invest into a Kyle Pitts, who I think has 8 to 10 years of Travis Kelce-esque production potential in your fantasy lineups and go that route with the guy who has next level speed, elite size and athleticism, and can be that next Travis Kelce and give you a ton of shelf life out in front of him, as opposed to drafting the guy high who's already there but could potentially, and I would argue again within the next 1 to 2 seasons, become a depreciating asset. There's 2 to 3 other tight ends, like I said, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, another one who I would rather have on my roster than Travis Kelce. You can pick up Mark Andrews in a startup draft after that point in time, and I know it's a headache. I absolutely hate in Dynasty leagues searching year over year for that next tight end for my roster. But even if you want to fade the tight end position and go after someone like a Pat Freiermuth, a Dawson Knox, if you wanted to kind of find the happy medium, that middle ground, and draft a 5th round or so tight end, a 6th round tight end even, maybe a TJ Hawkinson wouldn't be my favorite draft choice at that position. But the main case here is that there are a lot of other young, talented players at this position who, again, are probably never going to be the level of player that Travis Kelce is today, but they're also going to solve that position for a lot longer going forward. And you can use that 2nd round draft pick to get yourself a youthful running back who can make a big difference for you in the short term as well, within the next 3 to 4 seasons at a position of incredible need. Or you could find a wide receiver that has a ton of upside at that particular ADP. The next guy up here is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Something that we just talked about was shelf life. The factor of having your hand forced into needing to be a competitor right off the bat. And Derrick Henry's ADP right now is just too high for me to want to invest into him. I don't know. I mean, Derrick Henry is kind of an unprecedented player. It took him up until this past season, where he had just turned 28 years old in January this year. It took until his age 27 season, if you want to consider it that, to finally suffer a significant injury. He's been having high volume seasons year after year after year. And now the one thing that we had to consider with Derrick Henry is he didn't walk into the NFL as a workhorse running back. He was sitting and kind of waiting behind DeMarco Murray for the first 2 seasons of his career before he was really unleashed. But now we're at that point, and Derrick Henry is the man, and as he approaches age 30 and gets closer to that marker, you start to have fears and concerns of when is the end of the line for this elite RB1 potential. And I would say if you're more of a conservative and cautious fantasy player, that could be ending at the end of the 2022 season, and as you walk into 2023, you might start to see signs of erosion. Now, again, I think Derrick Henry's a bit of a unicorn here, so I'm going to bet that he might be able to prolong that for, let's say, the next 2 seasons. But by the third year, 2024, are we starting to talk about someone who is a lower-end RB1 or maybe even an RB2? Maybe the Titans have brought in another running back and started to, Deontay Foreman, he's another big physical bruising back that did quite well. In the absence of Henry, are they starting to turn over more carries in direction of another player and divvy up that workload a little bit? So there's going to be opportunities here for you to get a different player with a lot more shelf life. And that's the thing, because at the running back position where the wear and tear is going to accumulate a heck of a lot faster on an RB than it is even on a Travis Kelce, who I just stated my concerns about in the last segment there. You've got a immediate pressure to capitalize on having Derrick Henry on your roster. It's going to feel good and it's going to feel great walking out of the draft saying I have Derrick Henry on my team. But after next offseason, and especially it's going to sting even worse if your team suffers injury. If Derrick Henry is one of those players, it's really going to burn. His trade value is decreasing by the season, and I would argue the closer and farther we get through next year, the farther and farther that trade value is going to continue to dip. So if you can go after a guy like a Javonte Williams at this spot who gives you a lot more prolonged upside, heck, even an Antonio Gibson, a player who I talked about last video that has a really nice lacking amount of wear and tear on his body at this age 24 season that he's entering into. Heck, even Joe Mixon and Austin Eckler, who are not quite the caliber of Derrick Henry at the heights of his game, and who are still veterans, but are still younger in age and have less duress on their bodies than Derrick Henry does right now. Those might even be better options, although those wouldn't be my favorite choices to draft at that exact ADP. But essentially here, the case I'm stating is if you're looking to build a prolonged team and to keep a strong nucleus of young talent on your dynasty roster as the centerpieces of your franchise, Derrick Henry is not someone I'd be going after, and really I'd prefer to go another route. And then the last player I want to talk about here is Davante Adams. And Davante, I'm a Green Bay Packer fan for those of you who are new to the channel here. So if you're new, make sure to drop down and click the subscribe button. Obviously, I don't factor that fandom into my fantasy analysis because I was brutally harsh on Aaron Jones, or if you didn't think that was harsh, this is probably going to be even more harsh than my Aaron Jones take was. And I've been doing this throughout the entire season, the past 2 seasons that we've been doing the SFS channel here. Davante Adams is someone who could see his fantasy value drop off a cliff just like that. And he's not going to become some irrelevant player. He's not going to become unstartable in fantasy leagues. That's not exactly what I meant there, but he is someone who could go from being a top 2 fantasy wide receiver, maybe even top 3, depending on what you want to argue, to no longer being a wide receiver 1. And the reasoning for that is because the connection with Aaron Rodgers is so important to the situation, and that's going to make Davante Adams' fantasy value for next season uber dependent on the decision Aaron Rodgers makes and who his quarterback, that being Davante Adams, is for next season. You could argue that Aaron Jones could get work and get touches, and the run game could become more of a focal point for Green Bay's offense if Green Bay has to pivot off of Aaron Rodgers and move to Jordan Love. Maybe collectively, A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are seeing an uptick in their overall touches. But Davante Adams is playing a dependent position. He needs the quarterback he's playing with to be in sync with him, be in rhythm, be on the same page, and have chemistry to deliver the ball on time and on target. And that is something that Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams have nearly a decade of work built around, 8 NFL seasons worth of experience together growing and having Davante Adams in the starting lineup since he was a rookie in 2014, being the number 3 receiver for that offense. So there's a lot to lose here. If Davante is not paired with Aaron Rodgers next season, there is an immediate learning curve that has to take place between him and his next quarterback. And you can talk about some of, Cooper Kupp gets this situation where he gets Matthew Stafford. He changed quarterbacks and he ascended his game. He didn't get worse. But that's a little bit different. Cooper Kupp stayed in the same offense, stayed in the same head coach under the umbrella of his team. And Matthew Stafford was an upgrade over the previous quarterback, Jared Goff. Almost anyone Davante Adams could go to after Aaron Rodgers would be, in most cases, a significant downgrade. But in 90%, unless you're talking him becoming a Buffalo Bill with Josh Allen, which he would have a ton of competition for targets. Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, if he were to become a Kansas City Chief, same deal. These being the two places where he could potentially see a quarterback upgrade. That's just not going to happen. It's not something that's going to be feasible for those teams to do based off of their cap numbers and just what you would expect. And the point I'm trying to make here is that almost every situation with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers not being Green Bay Packers next year means a worse situation, which is going to have harsh consequences on the production that he's able to produce for your lineups. And on top of that, being a player who is approaching that age 30 marker, he'll be playing his age 29 season next year. And I believe it is I didn't write down his exact birthday, but I believe it's in late November that he will be turning 30 years of age. You're kind of crossing that line, and you're talking about a player whose ADP is in the first round. I would much rather have a youthful option with a lot of upside and a lot of career left in front of him. Even someone who has long-term potential that doesn't have the right quarterback right now, I would probably rather draft and have on my team than Davante Adams, because it is a player who very easily, once free agency in the draft occurs, could impact your team. So if you're drafting prior to that point, while his ADP is still as high as it is, I would look to explore other options. I think that if you were currently a Davante Adams fantasy owner, you should be looking to sell and trade him, because again, I think that this has a great chance to become a less desirable situation, and something that if you look back on, even if he goes to a situation in Las Vegas with Derek Carr, his former college quarterback at Fresno State, that's even a gap of 8 years where that chemistry has not been built upon and has been left by the wayside. So I don't see how this can get much better for Davante than he currently has it, and that's why I would look to go another option. Alrighty, those are the 5 players right now that I'm currently looking to stay away from in Dynasty Startup Drafts. I will absolutely be making more of these episodes, both the 5 players I'm all over, because there are a lot of guys I love at the top of draft boards. I'll be talking about guys the middle tier and late tier rounds of the draft board, and I'll be making another rendition of this episode as well, for sure, throughout this offseason, where I talk players who I'm cautious of, I'm not looking to make investments in, and obviously don't have the utmost confidence in long-term being dynasty assets for our team. So thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, as always, drop down, click that subscribe button, and leave today's episode with a like before you head on out. Go check out some of the other videos we've got on the SFS channel. We've got a 2022 Dynasty Fantasy Football playlist, so you can go check out all the videos I made so far this offseason since the conclusion of the 2021 redraft year. So thank you one more time, you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.